The dust-choked wind swept through Republic, Washington that blistering August afternoon in 1887, carrying with it the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains and the bitter taste of failure that Nora Thornton had grown accustomed to swallowing. She stood on the sagging porch of the boarding house. Her late father had left her 6 months ago, watching the paint peel from the railings like the last vestiges of hope flaking away from her heart, knowing that if she did not find a paying guest within the week, the bank would take everything she had left in this world. The boarding house had been her father's dream, built with money borrowed against promises of gold strikes and timber fortunes that never materialized in this struggling mountain town. When Daniel Thornton had collapsed in the street outside the assayer's office, clutching his chest and gasping his final breaths, he had left his 23-year-old daughter with nothing but a ramshackle 3-story building, debts that multiplied like rabbits, and a stubborn determination inherited from his own Irish blood. Nora had tried everything she could think of to attract boarders. She had posted notices at the general store, the saloon, even the small church where miners and loggers occasionally appeared on Sundays seeking absolution for Saturday night sins. But Republic was dying a slow death, its population dwindling as men followed rumors of richer strikes to the Klondike or better opportunities in the coastal cities. Those who remained either had their own homes or bunked in the lumber camps that dotted the mountains, paying their employers for the privilege of sleeping in lice-infested barracks. She had not had a single guest since taking over the property. Not one. The money her father had saved, what little there was, had run out 3 weeks ago. Nora had sold her mother's silver candlesticks, the good china, even the pocket watch that had belonged to her grandfather. She had eaten nothing but beans and the vegetables from her struggling garden for days. The bank manager, a ferret-faced man named Hoskins, had visited yesterday with papers in his hand and sympathy in his eyes that felt more insulting than honest cruelty would have been. He had given her until the following Monday. 7 days to produce 2 months' worth of mortgage payments or forfeit the property. Nora was considering which of her remaining possessions might fetch enough at the pawnshop to buy another week when she saw the rider coming up the dusty Main Street. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad-shouldered frame moving with the easy rhythm of a man who had spent more of his life on horseback than on his own 2 feet. His hat was pulled low against the afternoon sun, casting his face in shadow, but she could see the dust that covered his dark clothes and the weary slope of his shoulders. The horse beneath him, a sturdy roan mare, looked as tired as its rider. The man reined in his mount directly in front of her boarding house, which surprised Nora more than she cared to admit. Most people rode past without a second glance at the faded sign that proclaimed Thornton's boarding house, clean rooms, fair prices. The paint had weathered so badly that the words were barely legible, another repair she could not afford to make. He dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of long practice, looping the reins around the hitching post that leaned at a precarious angle. When he lifted his head, Nora found herself looking into a pair of gray eyes that were startling in their intensity, set in a face that was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin. He looked to be somewhere in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar, and a jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard. There was something guarded in his expression, a wariness that Nora recognized because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. "You have rooms available." His voice was deep, roughened by trail dust and what sounded like disuse, as though he was not accustomed to speaking much. Nora's heart kicked against her ribs. "Yes," she said, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "I have several rooms available. All clean, and the rates are reasonable." The man studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes taking in everything from her faded calico dress to the worn boots that peeked from beneath her hem. Nora lifted her chin, refusing to be embarrassed by her poverty. She might be broke, but she still had her pride. "I need a room for a while," he said finally. "Not sure how long yet. A week at least, maybe more." A week. A week of income would buy her time, would let her pay enough to Hoskins to stave off foreclosure for at least another month. Nora clasped her hands together to keep them from trembling. "That would be fine," she managed. "The rate is 50 cents a night, including breakfast and supper." She watched his expression shift, saw the flicker of something that might have been surprise or calculation. The rate was low, she knew, probably lower than she should be charging, but she needed this guest more than she needed pride or profit. "That seems more than fair," he said after a moment. "Name's Cole Irwin. Nora Thornton. This is my place." She gestured to the house behind her, trying to see it through his eyes and wondering what he made of the peeling paint and sagging steps. Cole Irwin nodded slowly, then reached back to untie his saddlebags from behind the saddle. "I will take you up on that room then, Miss Thornton." Nora's breath released in a rush she had not realized she had been holding. "I will show you inside. You can stable your horse out back. There is hay and fresh water." She led him through the front door into the dim interior of the boarding house, acutely aware of every flaw and shortcoming. The entry hall had once been grand, or at least her father had intended it to be, with a staircase that curved up to the second floor and wallpaper imported from San Francisco. But the wallpaper had faded and torn in places, and the floorboards creaked ominously underfoot. To the left was the parlor, furnished with mismatched chairs and a sofa that had seen better decades. To the right was the dining room, where a long table sat surrounded by empty chairs, all waiting for guests who never came. "I have 5 rooms on the second floor and 3 on the third," Nora said, trying to sound professional despite her nervousness. "You can have your pick. The corner room on the second floor gets the best light and has a view of the mountains." Cole Irwin followed her up the stairs, his boots heavy on the worn treads. She showed him to the corner room, which she had prepared hopefully just that morning, changing the linens on the bed and sweeping the floor until not a speck of dust remained. The room was simply furnished with a bed, a dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a single chair positioned by the window. A rag rug covered the floor beside the bed, one of the few things her mother had made that Nora could not bring herself to sell. Cole set his saddlebags on the chair and walked to the window, looking out at the view of pine-covered mountains that rose in the distance. "This will do fine," he said quietly. Relief flooded through Nora so intensely that her knees felt weak. "Supper is at 6, she said. "I will ring the bell. There is fresh water in the pitcher, and if you need more, the pump is in the kitchen. Let me know if you need anything else." She started to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Mr. Irwin, I will need payment in advance. I hope you do not mind." He turned from the window, and for a moment she thought she saw understanding in those gray eyes. "That is fine," he said, reaching into his pocket. He counted out coins into her palm, enough for a week's stay. The metal was warm from his body heat, and Nora's fingers closed around them reflexively. "Thank you," she whispered. Cole nodded, but there was something in his expression that made her think he understood exactly how desperate she was, and somehow that made her feel both grateful and exposed. She retreated to the hallway and made her way back downstairs, the coins clutched tightly in her hand. In the kitchen, Nora allowed herself a moment to lean against the counter, eyes closed, breathing deeply. One guest. One man who needed a room. It was not much, but it was something. It was enough to keep going, at least for now. She opened her eyes and looked at the coins in her palm, counting them again to make certain they were real. $3.50. 7 nights of shelter. 7 nights of hope. She had beans and salt pork for supper, some potatoes from the garden, and the last of the flour for biscuits. It was not fancy, but it was filling and honest. Nora set to work, stoking the fire in the cast-iron stove and hauling water from the pump to wash the potatoes. As she worked, she found herself wondering about Cole Irwin. There was something about him that intrigued her, a quiet intensity that seemed at odds with the bone-deep weariness she had seen in his face. He had not asked many questions, had not demanded to see all the rooms or haggle over the price. He had simply accepted what she offered, and there was something almost careful in the way he moved, as though he was used to being watched or maybe used to watching for threats. Republic. Washington was not the kind of place where strangers arrived without reason. It was too small, too remote, tucked into the mountains of the northeastern part of the state where the mining had mostly played out, and the timber operations were the only thing keeping the town from becoming a ghost. Men who came here were usually running from something or looking for something, and Nora could not help but wonder which category Cole Irwin fell into. She heard the back door open and close, followed by the sound of his boots on the steps leading down to the yard. Through the window, she watched him lead his horse to the small stable behind the house, moving with that same fluid grace he had shown when dismounting. He took his time settling the mare, removing the saddle and bridle, brushing away the trail dust with long, patient strokes. There was a gentleness in the way he handled the animal that softened something in Nora's chest. A man who was kind to his horse, her father had always said, was generally a man you could trust. Cole disappeared into the stable for several minutes, and when he emerged, he carried a bucket of water that he set beside the trough. He stood for a moment, looking up at the mountains with his hands resting on his hips, and Nora found herself staring at the way the late afternoon light caught the angles of his profile. Then he turned and walked back toward the house, and she quickly returned her attention to the potatoes, her cheeks flushing at having been caught watching him, even though there was no way he could have known. The afternoon stretched into evening, and Nora worked with the focused intensity of someone who needed to stay busy, to keep darker thoughts at bay. She prepared the meal, set the table in the dining room with 2 places instead of the usual one, and even picked a few wildflowers from the overgrown garden to put in a jar as a centerpiece. It was a small thing, perhaps foolish, but it made the room feel less empty, less sad. At precisely 6 o'clock, she rang the brass bell that hung beside the kitchen door. The sound echoed through the empty house, and for a moment she wondered if Cole would come, or if he had changed his mind and slipped away while she was cooking, taking his money with him. But then she heard footsteps on the stairs, and he appeared in the doorway of the dining room, his hair damp as though he had washed at the basin in his room, his face freshly shaved. "Smells good," he said, and there was something almost shy in the way he stood there, as though he was not quite sure of his welcome. "Please sit," Nora said, gesturing to the table. She had set his place at the head where her father used to sit and taken her own seat to the right. It felt strange to have someone else in the room, strange and wonderful at the same time. She brought out the food, serving him generous portions that made her own plate look meager by comparison. Cole noticed, his eyes flickering from her plate to his, and he started to say something, but Nora cut him off. "I ate while I was cooking," she lied, the words coming easily after so many days of practice. "Please eat." He studied her for a moment longer, then picked up his fork. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Nora was acutely aware of every sound, the scrape of utensils against plates, the creak of the house settling around them, the distant call of a crow outside the window. "How long have you been running this place?" Cole asked finally, breaking the silence. 6 months, Nora said. "My father passed in February. He left me the boarding house." "I am sorry for your loss." The sympathy in his voice sounded genuine, and Nora felt a lump rise in her throat. She swallowed it down. "Thank you. It has been difficult, but I am managing." The lie tasted bitter, but she could not bring herself to tell this stranger the truth, that she was barely surviving, that the house was mortgaged beyond its worth, that she was one missed payment away from sleeping in the street. Pride was a strange thing, stubborn and unreasonable, and Nora clung to it like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. "This is a good meal," Cole said. "Best I have had in weeks." Nora felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. "You have been on the trail long enough." His voice carried a note of finality that suggested the subject was closed, and Nora did not press. Everyone had secrets, especially in the West, and she had learned early not to ask questions that might not be welcome. They finished the meal with sporadic conversation, small exchanges about the weather and the town that revealed little about either of them. When the plates were empty, Cole stood and began gathering the dishes, which surprised Nora so much that she nearly dropped the platter she was holding. "You do not have to do that," she protested. "You are a paying guest." "I do not mind helping," Cole said simply. "Besides, you cooked. Seems only fair to help clean up." Nora wanted to argue, but the truth was that having help, any help, felt like a luxury she had not realized she missed. She led the way into the kitchen, and together they washed and dried the dishes in a companionable silence that felt oddly comfortable, despite their being strangers. She found herself hyper-aware of his presence beside her at the sink, the way his shoulder nearly brushed hers when he reached for a towel, the warmth that seemed to radiate from him in the small space. When the last dish was put away, Cole excused himself to his room, and Nora was left alone in the kitchen with the dying light filtering through the window and the lingering scent of soap and something else, something that might have been leather and horse and man. She pressed her hands to her heated cheeks, wondering at her own reaction. It had been so long since she had been close to anyone, so long since she had had any company at all, that even this simple interaction had left her feeling unsteady. She locked the doors, banked the fire in the stove, and made her way up to her own room on the 3rd floor, the coins from Cole's payment tucked safely in her pocket. In her room, a small space under the eaves that had been hers since childhood, she counted the money again by candlelight, then added it to the meager savings she kept hidden in a tin box under the floorboards. It was not enough to save the house, not nearly enough, but it was a start. It was hope. Nora changed into her nightgown and lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in the house. She heard Cole's footsteps as he moved around his room, heard the creak of bed springs as he settled for the night. The sounds were strangely comforting, a reminder that she was not completely alone in the world, at least not tonight. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, her dreams were filled with gray eyes and gentle hands and the faint possibility that maybe, just maybe, things might get better. The morning arrived with pale sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of a rooster crowing somewhere in the distance. Nora dressed quickly in the pre-dawn dimness, pinning her dark hair into a simple bun at the nape of her neck and splashing cold water on her face from the basin in her room. She made her way downstairs quietly, not wanting to wake Cole, and set about preparing breakfast with the efficiency born of long practice. She had promised him breakfast, and even though her supplies were dangerously low, she was determined to give him something substantial. There were eggs from the 3 chickens she kept in a small coop out back, more biscuits made from the last of the flour, and coffee that she had been rationing for weeks. She fried salt pork in the big iron skillet and stirred up gravy to go over the biscuits, working quickly and quietly in the gray morning light. Cole appeared in the kitchen doorway just as she was plating the food, and she nearly dropped the spatula in surprise. She had not heard him come down the stairs. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. He looked younger somehow in the morning light, the hardness in his face softened by the golden glow filtering through the window. "Good morning," Nora replied, steadying her hand. "Breakfast is ready. We can eat in the dining room, or if you prefer, the kitchen table is fine." "Kitchen is good," Cole said, pulling out one of the two chairs that flanked the small wooden table beneath the window. "More friendly." Nora felt a smile tug at her lips despite herself. She brought the plates to the table and poured coffee into two chipped mugs, then sat across from him. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Nora found herself studying him from beneath her lashes, noting the way his hands moved, competent and sure, the way his eyes seemed to catalog everything in the room as though looking for threats or exits. "You have anyone to help you run this place?" Cole asked suddenly, looking up from his plate. Nora shook her head. "Just me. I had a woman who came in to help with the cleaning, but I had to let her go a few months back." She did not add that she could not afford to pay help, that she could barely afford to feed herself. Cole frowned slightly, his gaze drifting to the window that overlooked the backyard. "That is a lot of work for one person. This is a big house." "I manage," Nora said, perhaps more sharply than she intended. "I have been managing just fine on my own." He held up a hand in a gesture of peace. "I did not mean any offense, just an observation." Nora felt her defensiveness deflate. "I am sorry. I am not used to having help anymore, or company for that matter." "I gathered that," Cole said quietly. "I am your first guest, am I not?" There was no judgment in his voice, only a kind of gentle understanding that made Nora's throat tighten. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Well then," Cole said, "I am honored to be the first, and if you do not mind, I would like to help out while I am here." "Nothing major, just small things. Repairs and such. I am handy with tools, and I noticed yesterday that your hitching post is about to fall over, and some of those porch steps need replacing before someone breaks their neck." Nora started to protest, to say that he was a paying guest and she could not ask that of him, but Cole cut her off with a shake of his head. "You are not asking. I am offering. Consider it a trade. I help with some repairs and maybe you knock a little off my rate. Fair deal." It was more than fair. It was generous to the point of charity, and they both knew it, but something in Cole's expression told Nora that he was giving her a way to accept help without sacrificing her pride. She found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "All right," she said. "If you are sure you do not mind." "I do not mind at all," Cole said. "Gives me something to do. I am not much good at sitting idle." After breakfast, Cole disappeared outside to assess the repairs that needed doing, and Nora set about her daily chores with a lightness she had not felt in months. She stripped the beds in the empty rooms and washed the linens, even though there was no one to use them, hung them on the line out back to dry in the mountain breeze. She swept floors and dusted furniture and scrubbed the kitchen until it gleamed. Through the window, she watched Cole work on the hitching post, digging it out of the ground and resetting it with fresh dirt packed tight around the base. He worked with his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle, and Nora found herself distracted more than once by the sight. When he caught her watching, he lifted a hand in greeting and she quickly turned away, her cheeks burning. The morning bled into afternoon, and Nora prepared a simple lunch of bread and cheese and the last of the vegetables from the garden. She called Cole in from his work, and they ate together on the back porch, sitting on the steps in the warm sunshine. It felt almost normal, almost like having a friend, and Nora realized with a pang how much she had missed simple human companionship. "How long have you lived in Republic?" Cole asked, biting into an apple he had produced from his pocket. "All my life," Nora said. "I was born here, back in 1864, right after the town was founded. My father came looking for gold and stayed because he fell in love with my mother. She was a teacher who had come out from Boston to start a school. That must have been quite a change for her." "It was," Nora said, smiling at the memory of her mother's stories. "She used to tell me about how shocked she was by everything out here. The roughness, the lack of refinement, but she adapted, and she loved my father enough to make it work. She died when I was 12, fever." "I am sorry," Cole said quietly. "It was a long time ago," Nora said, though the loss still ached sometimes, a dull pain that never quite went away. "What about you? Where are you from?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the mountains in the distance. "Here and there," he said finally. "I have been moving around for a while now. Texas originally, but I have been up in Montana for the past couple years, cowboying mostly, wherever I could find work. And now you are here in Republic." It was not quite a question, but it hung in the air between them. "And now I am here," Cole agreed, offering no further explanation. Nora wanted to ask why, wanted to know what had brought him to this dying town at the edge of nowhere, but she sensed that pushing would only make him close up further. So instead, she finished her lunch in silence and stood to gather the plates. "Thank you for helping with the repairs," she said. "You did not have to do that." "I know," Cole said, looking up at her with those steady gray eyes. "But I wanted to." The days fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and comforting. Cole worked on repairs around the boarding house during the day, fixing everything from loose floorboards to the broken shutter on the second floor that had been banging in the wind for months. Nora cooked and cleaned and tried not to watch him too obviously as he worked. They shared meals in the kitchen, their conversations growing longer and more comfortable as the initial wariness between them began to fade. On the third day, Nora screwed up her courage and walked into town to pay Hoskins at the bank. She had counted her money carefully and knew she still did not have enough to cover the full amount owed, but she hoped that making a partial payment would show good faith and buy her more time. The bank manager looked at the coins she placed on his desk with barely concealed disappointment. "Miss Thornton, this is not enough," he said, shaking his head. "Not nearly enough." "I know," Nora said, lifting her chin, "but I have a paying guest now at the boarding house. He has paid for a week and there will be more. I just need a little more time." Hoskins sighed, a long, suffering sound that made Nora's hands clench into fists at her sides. "Miss Thornton, I appreciate your efforts, truly I do, but the bank has been more than patient. Your father's debts are considerable and the property is not worth what he owed on it. I am trying to help you, but my hands are tied." "How much time do I have?" Nora asked, her voice flat. 2 weeks, Hoskins said, and there was genuine regret in his eyes. "I can give you 2 more weeks to come up with the full amount. After that, I will have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings. I am sorry." Nora walked back to the boarding house in a daze, the coins she had hoped would save her already spent and still not enough. 2 weeks. 14 days to somehow come up with money she did not have and could not earn, not with only one guest who had already paid for his stay. It felt hopeless, impossible, and she found herself fighting back tears as she climbed the steps to the porch. Cole was there, replacing the rotten boards on the 3rd step, and he looked up as she approached. Whatever he saw in her face made him set down his hammer and stand, his expression concerned. "What happened?" he asked. Nora shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. If she opened her mouth, she was afraid everything would come pouring out, all the fear and desperation and bone-deep exhaustion she had been carrying for months. "Nora," Cole said, and the use of her first name, the gentleness in his voice, nearly undid her. "Talk to me." "I cannot," she whispered. "I am sorry. I just need a moment." She brushed past him into the house and made it as far as the kitchen before the tears came. She sank into a chair and buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She heard footsteps behind her, felt Cole's presence, and then a handkerchief was being pressed into her hand. "I am sorry," she choked out. "This is not your problem. I should not burden you." "You are not burdening me," Cole said quietly. He pulled out the other chair and sat, waiting patiently until she had composed herself enough to look at him. "Tell me what is wrong. Maybe I can help." And so Nora told him. Everything. About her father's debts, the mortgage she could not pay, the bank's ultimatum. About how she had been trying to make the boarding house work for months with no guests and no income, selling everything she owned just to buy a little more time. About how she was going to lose everything in 2 weeks because she had no way to come up with the money Hoskins demanded. Cole listened without interrupting, his gray eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "How much do you need?" he asked finally. Nora laughed, a bitter sound. "More than I could ever ask of anyone. $87. It was a fortune, more money than most people in Republic saw in 6 months. Cole's jaw tightened and he looked away, staring at the wall as though working through some internal calculation. "I can help," he said. Nora's breath caught. "What?" "I have some money saved," Cole said slowly. "Not all of it, but enough to make a good dent. Maybe buy you more time at least." "No," Nora said immediately, shaking her head. "No, I cannot take your money. That is not why I told you. I just needed to tell someone, but I cannot accept that." "Why not?" Cole's gaze swung back to her, intense and searching. "You need help. I can give it. Why is that so hard to accept?" "Because I do not know you," Nora said desperately. "You have been here 3 days. I have no way to pay you back. It would be taking charity, and I cannot do that." "It is not charity if it is a loan," Cole pointed out. "You can pay me back when the boarding house is profitable again. I am not going anywhere. You said you were only staying a week. Plans change." Cole leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Look, Nora, I know we have not known each other long, but I have a good feeling about you, about this place. Maybe I am tired of drifting. Maybe I am looking for a reason to stay somewhere. This could be good for both of us. You get the help you need to save your home, and I get a place to stay until I figure out what comes next." Nora stared at him, torn between hope and suspicion. "Why would you do this? What is in it for you?" Cole's expression shuddered slightly, and he looked away again. "Let us just say I have my reasons, and leave it at that for now." There was something he was not telling her, some piece of the puzzle missing, but Nora found that she did not care as much as she probably should. The offer was a lifeline, and she was drowning. "Sometimes you did not question the hand that pulled you from the water." "I will pay you back," she said firmly. "Every penny. I do not know how long it will take, but I will do it." "I know you will," Cole said, and something in his voice made her believe that he truly did trust her. "So we have a deal," Nora nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Cole stood and held out his hand, and after a moment she took it. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip firm but careful, and Nora felt something shift in her chest, some barrier beginning to crack. That evening, Cole rode into town and returned with news that made Nora's knees weak with relief. He had gone to the bank and made a payment of $60, enough to satisfy Hoskins for at least another few months. The bank manager had been surprised, Cole reported, with something that might have been amusement, but he had accepted the payment and given Cole a receipt as proof. "I kept some back for myself," Cole explained, "for supplies and such, but this should give you breathing room." Nora looked at the receipt in her trembling hands, at the proof that her home was safe for now, and felt tears sting her eyes again. "I do not know how to thank you," she whispered. "You do not have to thank me," Cole said. "Just keep cooking those good meals and let me stick around for a while." "That is thanks enough." Over the following days, something changed between them. The wariness that had characterized their early interactions faded, replaced by an easy companionship that felt natural despite the strangeness of their situation. Cole continued working on repairs, and Nora found herself working alongside him, handing him tools or holding boards steady while he hammered. They talked while they worked, sharing stories and observations that gradually painted a fuller picture of each other. Nora learned that Cole had been born in Texas in 1860, that his parents had died when he was young, and that he had been raised by an uncle who ran cattle. He had worked as a cowboy since he was old enough to sit a horse, drifting from ranch to ranch, following work wherever it took him. There was a restlessness in him, Nora realized, a deep-seated inability to stay in one place that he seemed to be fighting against now. Cole learned that Nora had loved teaching at the small school her mother had founded, that she had dreams once of going to San Francisco to see the ocean, that she played piano though the boarding house no longer had one because she had sold it months ago. She told him about her father's endless optimism, the way he had always believed the next venture would be the one that succeeded, and how she had inherited both his stubbornness and his tendency to hold on to hope long past the point of reason. On the 8th day of Cole's stay, Nora woke to the sound of hammering and went downstairs to find him already at work, this time in the parlor. He had moved the furniture to one side and was pulling up the damaged floorboards in the corner where water had leaked through a crack in the ceiling during the last rain. "You are up early," Nora said from the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Cole looked up, a nail clenched between his teeth. He removed it and grinned at her, a real smile that transformed his whole face and made Nora's heart do a strange flip in her chest. "Wanted to get these boards replaced before it got too hot," he said. "Figured the parlor would be nice to have in working order once you start getting more guests." "Once I start getting more guests," Nora repeated, unable to keep the doubt from her voice. "You will," Cole said with a confidence she wished she could share. "This is a good place, Nora. People will come." She wanted to believe him. More than that, she was starting to realize that she wanted him to stay, wanted these mornings of waking to the sound of his work, these evenings of sharing meals and conversation. It was a dangerous wanting, she knew, because Cole had made it clear that he was a drifter, a man not accustomed to staying anywhere for long. But her heart was proving stubbornly resistant to logic. That afternoon, a wagon pulled up in front of the boarding house, and Nora felt her pulse quicken with nervous excitement. A man and woman climbed down, both looking dusty and tired from travel. The man approached the porch where Nora was shaking out a rug. "You have rooms available?" he asked, his voice carrying the accent of somewhere back east. "Yes," Nora said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, we do. How many nights?" "Just 2, if that is all right. We are passing through on our way to Spokane, and we heard in town that you run a clean establishment." They heard in town. Someone had recommended her boarding house. Nora felt a smile break across her face. "That is wonderful. Yes, please come in. I will show you the rooms." She glanced back and saw Cole watching from the parlor doorway, a pleased expression on his face. He gave her a small nod of encouragement, and Nora felt warmth spread through her chest as she led the couple inside. The guests, a middle-aged couple named William and Martha Patterson, stayed for 3 days instead of 2, and paid without complaint. They praised Nora's cooking, remarked on how well maintained the boarding house was, and promised to recommend it to anyone they met who was traveling through Republic. When they left, Martha hugged Nora and pressed an extra $1 into her hand as a tip for the excellent service. 2 days later, another guest arrived, a prospector heading into the mountains to try his luck in the streams north of town. Then came a traveling salesman, then a young couple newly married and looking for temporary lodging while their own home was being built at the edge of town. Within 2 weeks of Cole's arrival, the boarding house was hosting a steady trickle of guests, not enough to fill every room but enough to give Nora real hope that she might actually make this work. Cole stayed through it all, still occupying the corner room on the second floor, still helping with repairs and improvements. He built new shelves in the kitchen, fixed the pump that had been giving Nora trouble for months, and even constructed a small bench for the front porch. Nora found herself relying on him more and more, not just for the physical labor but for his steady presence, his quiet competence, the way he seemed to understand what she needed before she asked. They fell into a pattern of working together during the day and sharing meals in the kitchen after the other guests had been served. The dining room was now often full of boarders, which meant Nora was cooking more than ever. But Cole helped with that too, peeling potatoes and washing dishes, and somehow making even the mundane tasks feel less like work. Their conversations grew longer, more personal, punctuated by laughter and comfortable silences that spoke of a deepening connection. One evening, after a particularly busy day, Nora and Cole found themselves alone in the kitchen long after the last guest had retired. Nora was washing the supper dishes and Cole was drying, their movements synchronized from weeks of practice. The window was open, letting in the cool night air and the sound of crickets chirping in the darkness. "I have been thinking," Cole said, breaking the companionable silence. "About what?" Nora glanced at him, noting the serious expression on his face. "About staying, permanently, I mean." He set down the towel and turned to face her fully. "If you would have me." Nora's hands stilled in the soapy water, her heart suddenly pounding. "What do you mean?" Cole took a breath, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression, something that looked almost like fear. "I mean I am tired of drifting, Nora. I have spent years moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. And then I came here, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I could have a home, like I could have a life that means something." "Cole," Nora whispered, not sure what to say, how to respond to this sudden declaration. "I know I have only been here a few weeks," Cole continued, the words coming faster now as though he needed to get them all out before he lost his nerve. "And I know we are still getting to know each other, but I care about you, Nora. I care about this place. And I think maybe you care about me too, at least a little." Nora realized she was still holding a dripping plate, and she set it carefully in the dish rack before turning to face him. "I do care about you," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "More than is probably wise." Something flared in Cole's eyes, hope mixed with relief. "Then let me stay. Not as a guest, but as a partner. I could help you run this place, make it something really special. We could build something together if you will let me." Nora's mind was racing. Everything he was saying was exactly what she wanted to hear, and that terrified her. She had been alone for so long, had learned to rely only on herself, and the thought of trusting someone else with her future, with her heart, was both thrilling and frightening. "I need to know something first," she said, looking him directly in the eyes. "Why did you come to Republic? What are you running from?" Cole's expression tightened, and for a moment Nora thought he would refuse to answer. Then he sighed and leaned back against the counter, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I was working on a ranch up in Montana," he said quietly. "Good job, good people. But the foreman's son took a dislike to me, started making trouble. He was a bully, used to getting his way because of who his father was. One night he pushed too far, started a fight in the bunkhouse. I defended myself and he ended up hurt. Not badly, but enough that there was talk of bringing the sheriff in. The foreman's son lied about what happened, said I started it, and it was my word against his. He looked up at Nora, his jaw tight. I did not do anything wrong, but I knew how it would play out. Small town, powerful family, and me just another drifting cowboy. So I left before they could arrest me. I have been moving ever since, trying to put enough distance between me and that mess." Nora absorbed this, studying his face. "Do you think they are still looking for you?" "I do not know," Cole admitted. "Maybe. But it has been months now, and I was just one hired hand among many. Chances are they have forgotten all about me." He straightened, his expression earnest. "I did not hurt that man any more than I had to in order to protect myself, Nora. I swear to you, I am not a violent man." "I believe you," Nora said, and realized with some surprise that she did. She had seen the gentleness in Cole, the careful way he moved through the world. Whatever had happened in Montana, she trusted that he was telling her the truth. "So what do you say?" Cole asked, taking a step toward her. "Will you let me stay? Will you give us a chance?" Nora's breath caught as he reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and slightly damp from the dishwater. She looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face, at the hope and vulnerability written there so clearly. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I want you to stay." Cole's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds, brilliant and transforming. He squeezed her hand gently, then lifted it to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned and courtly, and made Nora's entire body flush with warmth. "You will not regret this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I promise you, Nora, I will work every day to make sure you never regret giving me this chance." The kiss came a week later, on a warm September evening as they stood together on the back porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. They had spent the day working side by side, as had become their habit, and Nora was acutely aware of Cole's presence beside her, the warmth of his body just inches from hers. "Beautiful, is it not?" Cole said softly, his gaze on the riot of colors painting the sky. "It is," Nora agreed, though she found herself looking at him instead of the sunset. Cole turned his head and caught her watching. For a long moment they simply stared at each other, the air between them charged with an electricity that made Nora's skin tingle. Then Cole reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and cupped her face in his palm. "I want to kiss you," he said, his voice low and rough. "But only if you want it too." Nora's answer was to lean into his touch, her eyes drifting closed. She felt his other hand come up to frame her face, gentle and reverent, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and perfect. The kiss was sweet and unhurried, a question and an answer all at once, and when they finally pulled apart, Nora felt dizzy with joy. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Cole admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "I am glad you finally did," Nora said, and then she was the one initiating the kiss this time, rising up on her toes to meet his mouth with hers. They stood there on the porch as the sky darkened and stars began to appear overhead, stealing kisses like teenagers and laughing breathlessly between them. It felt like a beginning, like the first page of a new chapter in both their lives, and Nora felt something that had been tightly wound in her chest for months finally begin to loosen. The boarding house continued to thrive, as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and red. Word had spread that Thornton's boarding house offered clean rooms, good food, and fair prices, and Nora found herself with a nearly full house most nights. The income was steady now, enough to cover expenses with some left over to start paying back Cole for his loan and even to begin saving for the future. Cole had transitioned seamlessly from guest to partner, taking on more and more responsibility for the maintenance and upkeep of the property. He had a way with people that complemented Nora's more reserved nature, greeting guests with easy warmth and making them feel welcome. Together, they made a good team, and Nora found herself falling more in love with him with each passing day. They had not spoken explicitly about marriage, but it hung in the air between them, an unspoken understanding that this was heading somewhere permanent. Nora caught herself sometimes imagining what it would be like to be Cole's wife, to share not just the boarding house but a life together, and the thought filled her with a happiness so intense it almost frightened her. One cool October morning, Nora woke to find Cole already up and dressed, standing at the window of his room looking out at the mountains. She had slipped into his room the night before, as had become their habit, though they had not yet taken the final step of sharing his bed in the most intimate sense. They were waiting, both of them, for something that felt like the right moment. "What are you thinking about?" Nora asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders and joining him at the window. Cole slipped an arm around her waist and pulled her close. "Just thinking how lucky I am," he said. "How different my life could have been if I had not stopped here that day." "I am the lucky one," Nora said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You saved this place. You saved me." "We saved each other," Cole corrected gently. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Nora, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it carefully before you answer." Nora's heart began to race. "All right." Cole took both her hands in his thumbs rubbing gentle circles on her palms. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have loved you since that first day when you stood on the porch looking so fierce and determined, even though you were clearly falling apart. You are the strongest, most resilient person I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Nora's eyes, but they were tears of joy this time, not sorrow. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Cole, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Nora melted against him, feeling as though her heart might burst from the sheer intensity of her happiness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole pressed his forehead to hers. "I will make you happy," he promised. "Every day for the rest of our lives I will work to make you happy." "You already do," Nora whispered. They were married on a crisp November morning at the small church in Republic, with the few friends Nora had in town serving as witnesses. She wore a simple dress of pale blue that she had sewn herself, and Cole wore his best clothes with a wildflower boutonniere that matched the bouquet Nora carried. It was a small ceremony, nothing fancy, but to Nora, it was perfect. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and when Cole kissed her, Nora felt as though every struggle, every hardship she had endured over the past year had been worth it to reach this moment. They walked out of the church hand in hand to cheers from the small gathering, and Cole lifted her into the wagon he had borrowed for the occasion, decorated with ribbons and autumn leaves. They had decided to take a few days away from the boarding house, leaving it in the capable hands of a woman from town, who Nora had hired as extra help now that they could afford it. Cole drove the wagon out of Republic and up into the mountains, following a trail he had scouted weeks earlier. They traveled for most of the day, finally stopping at a small clearing beside a crystal-clear stream where the aspens glowed golden in the late afternoon light. Cole had prepared everything ahead of time, bringing supplies for camping and a stack of blankets and furs to keep them warm through the chilly mountain nights. He built a fire as the sun set, and they cooked a simple meal and ate sitting close together on a log, watching sparks drift up toward the stars. "This is perfect," Nora said softly, her head resting on Cole's shoulder. "I wanted to give you something special," Cole said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You deserve the world, Nora." "I just need you," Nora said, turning to look up at him. "You are all I need." That night, in the shelter of the tent Cole had erected, they finally came together as husband and wife. Cole was gentle and patient, taking his time to make sure Nora was comfortable, and when they finally joined, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath the blankets, listening to the sounds of the forest around them and feeling more content than either had ever thought possible. They spent 3 days in the mountains, hiking through the aspens, fishing in the stream, and making love under the stars. It was a honeymoon that cost almost nothing but meant everything. A perfect interlude before returning to the responsibilities waiting for them back in Republic. When they returned to the boarding house, it was to find it running smoothly under the care of their hired help, and with several new guests who had arrived in their absence. Nora and Cole fell back into their routines, but now as husband and wife, and the difference was palpable. There was a new ease between them, a security that came from knowing they were building a future together. Winter came to Republic with heavy snows that blanketed the mountains and turned the town into a wonderland of white. The boarding house was cozy and warm, the fire in the parlor burning constantly, and Nora found herself loving this season more than any before it. She had Cole beside her, their business was thriving, and for the first time since her father's death, she felt truly at peace. On a particularly cold January evening, as they sat together in the kitchen after the last guest had retired, Nora realized that her monthly bleeding was late, very late. She had not mentioned it to Cole, had not wanted to get his hopes up until she was certain, but as she sat there watching him read by lamplight, one hand absently rubbing her lower belly, she knew with a certainty that went beyond logic. "Cole," she said softly. He looked up from his book, his gray eyes finding hers immediately. "What is it?" "I think I might be pregnant." The book slipped from Cole's fingers and landed on the floor with a thump. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and Nora felt her heart begin to race with uncertainty. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, so wide and joyful that it transformed him. "Truly?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Nora nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "I think so. I'm not certain yet, but all the signs are there." Cole was out of his chair in an instant, crossing to her and pulling her up into his arms. He held her tightly, his face buried in her neck, and Nora felt the wetness of tears against her skin. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I love you so much, Nora." "I love you too," she whispered, holding him just as tightly. The winter months passed in a blur of morning sickness and growing anticipation. By February, there was no doubt that Nora was indeed carrying their child, and Cole became even more attentive than before, constantly checking to make sure she was not working too hard or lifting anything heavy. He took over most of the physical labor around the boarding house, enlisting the help of some of the regular guests when needed, and Nora found herself with more time to rest and prepare for the baby's arrival. They converted one of the small rooms on the 3rd floor into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow, and building a cradle from pine that Cole sanded and finished until it was smooth as silk. Nora sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was, how fragile and perfect. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and rushing streams fed by snowmelt, and Nora's belly grew round and full. She felt the baby move for the first time in April, a flutter like butterfly wings against her palm, and she grabbed Cole's hand and pressed it to the spot so he could feel it too. The look of wonder on his face made her fall in love with him all over again. On a warm day in late May, with the mountains green and beautiful outside the window, Nora went into labor. Cole sent for the doctor and the midwife who lived in town, then stayed by Nora's side through every contraction, holding her hand and wiping her brow and whispering encouragement, even when she cursed him for getting her into this situation in the first place. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the day and into the night, but finally, just as dawn was breaking over the mountains, their baby arrived with a lusty cry. The midwife cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing the tiny bundle in Nora's arms. "It is a boy," she announced with a smile. Nora looked down at her son, at his tiny face scrunched and red from crying, at the shock of dark hair that covered his head, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. Cole leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears, and gently touched one finger to the baby's tiny fist. The infant's fingers closed around his father's finger instinctively, and Cole let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He is perfect," Cole whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Nora asked, unable to take her eyes off her son's face. Cole was quiet for a moment, considering. "What about Daniel, after your father?" Nora looked up at him, surprised and touched. "You would want that, of course," Cole said. "Your father built this place, gave you everything you needed to make it work. It feels right to honor that." "Daniel Irwin," Nora said, testing the name. "I like it." Their son, Daniel, proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who kept them busy through the long days and short nights. Nora had hired additional help for the boarding house, a young woman named Sarah who proved to be competent and trustworthy, which allowed Nora to focus on caring for the baby while still overseeing the business. Cole was a devoted father, surprising Nora with his natural ease around the infant. He would walk the floors with Daniel when he was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice until the baby fell asleep against his chest. The boarding house continued to prosper. They had paid off the last of the mortgage debt earlier that spring, and Nora had wept with relief the day they received the deed to the property, free and clear. What had once seemed like an impossible burden was now their home, truly theirs, and the business provided a comfortable living for their small family. On a warm August evening, when Daniel was 3 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Nora and Cole found themselves alone on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of gold and pink. Cole had his arm around Nora's shoulders and she leaned into him, feeling utterly content. "You ever miss it?" Nora asked quietly. "The drifting, the freedom of the open range." Cole was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "But I do not miss the loneliness. I do not miss feeling like I did not belong anywhere." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "This is where I belong, Nora, with you and Daniel. This is home." "I am glad you stopped here that day," Nora said softly. "I do not know what would have happened to me if you had not." "You would have figured it out," Cole said with certainty. "You are too stubborn to give up, but I am glad I stopped too. Best decision I ever made." They sat together as the light faded and stars began to appear, comfortable in the silence and each other's presence. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of guests settling in for the night, the creak of floorboards and the murmur of voices, all the sounds of a home that was alive and thriving. The years that followed were good ones, full of hard work and simple joys. Daniel grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved following his father around as Cole worked on various projects around the boarding house. When Daniel was 2, Nora became pregnant again, and 9 months later, they welcomed a daughter they named Grace, after Cole's mother. Grace had her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfect. The boarding house earned a reputation as one of the finest establishments in northeastern Washington, and guests came from as far as Spokane and even Seattle to stay in the comfortable rooms and enjoy Nora's excellent cooking. Cole expanded the stable to accommodate more horses and built a small addition onto the back of the house, adding 3 more guest rooms to meet the growing demand. They hired more help as the business grew, creating jobs for several people in Republic and contributing to the town's slow but steady recovery. The bank manager, Hoskins, became a regular visitor, stopping by to share news of the town and to bounce Grace on his knee while discussing business with Cole and Nora. He had become something of a friend, his initial doubt about Nora's ability to run the boarding house long since forgotten. On a golden September afternoon in 1891, 4 years after Cole had first ridden into her life, Nora stood on the freshly painted porch of the boarding house, watching her children play in the yard while Cole worked nearby, building a swing that he planned to hang from the old oak tree. The house behind her was full of guests, the business was thriving, and she had a husband who loved her and children who were healthy and happy. She thought about that desperate woman she had been, standing on this same porch 4 years ago, watching her world crumble around her and seeing no way out. She thought about the cowboy who had stopped at her door, tired and weary and carrying his own burdens, and how they had saved each other in ways neither could have predicted. Cole looked up from his work and caught her watching. He grinned at her, that same brilliant smile that still made her heart skip, and set down his hammer. He crossed the yard to where she stood, pulling her into his arms right there on the porch where anyone could see. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice low and warm against her ear. "How lucky I am," Nora said, echoing the words he had said to her so long ago. "How different everything could have been." "But it was not," Cole said firmly. "We found each other and we built something beautiful together, and we are just getting started." He kissed her there on the porch, sweet and sure, and Nora kissed him back with all the love and gratitude she felt. In the yard, Daniel called out that he wanted to help with the swing, and Grace toddled over to tug on her father's pant leg, demanding attention. They broke apart with a laugh, and Cole bent to scoop up his daughter while reaching out a hand to his son. "Come on then," he said. "Let us finish this swing before supper." Nora watched them go, her family, her loves, her entire world. She thought about the closed door of the bank manager's office, the notice that had threatened to take everything, the desperation that had eaten at her until she thought she might disappear into it. And then she thought about the cowboy who had stopped at her door, the first and only guest she had needed, the man who had become her partner, her husband, her home. Inside, she could hear Sarah moving through the dining room, setting the table for supper. There would be 10 guests tonight, all paying customers who had come because of the reputation she and Cole had built together. The mortgage was paid, the business was thriving, and the future stretched out before them full of promise and possibility. Nora Irwin, formerly Thornton, no longer the desperate woman running a broke boarding house but a successful businesswoman, a wife, a mother, turned and went inside. There was supper to prepare, children to feed, a life to live that was richer and fuller than anything she had dared to dream 4 years ago. And it had all started with a single guest, a tired cowboy looking for a place to rest, who had found instead a home, a purpose, and a love that would last them both a lifetime. The evening light faded into dusk, and the lamps were lit throughout the boarding house, their warm glow spilling out into the growing darkness. Inside, there was laughter and conversation, the clatter of dishes and the sound of children playing. It was the sound of life, of hope, of dreams realized and futures secured. And in the kitchen, as Nora worked alongside her husband preparing the evening meal, their children playing at their feet, she offered up a silent prayer of thanks. For the cowboy who had stopped at her door when she needed him most, for the courage to accept help when it was offered, for the chance to build something lasting and true. The boarding house that had once been a burden, a failing dream inherited from a man who had died with more hope than sense, had become a thriving business and a home filled with love. The broke young woman who had stood on the porch watching her world fall apart had become a wife and mother and successful proprietor, secure in herself and her place in the world. And the cowboy, the drifter who had spent years moving from place to place without ever finding where he belonged, had finally found his home. In a small mountain town called Republic, in a boarding house that needed saving, with a woman who needed a partner and became his heart. Years continued to pass in Republic, Washington, each one adding to the rich tapestry of Cole and Nora's life together. The boarding house became a landmark in the small town, a place where travelers knew they would find clean rooms, excellent food, and a warm welcome. Cole's reputation as a skilled carpenter spread throughout the region, and he began taking on projects for other residents of Republic when time allowed, building barns and repairing homes and earning extra income that added to their growing savings. Daniel and Grace grew like wildflowers in the mountain air, healthy and happy children who knew they were loved. Daniel inherited his father's steady temperament and his mother's determination, while Grace was all fire and curiosity, constantly getting into mischief that exasperated and delighted her parents in equal measure. They attended the small school that Nora's mother had founded, now run by a young teacher from Portland, and they helped around the boarding house as they grew older, learning the value of hard work and honest dealing. In the spring of 1893, when Grace was 3 and Daniel was 5, Nora discovered she was pregnant again. The pregnancy was easier than the previous 2, and in December, they welcomed another son into their family, a sturdy baby with Cole's dark hair and Nora's brown eyes. They named him Thomas, and his arrival completed their family in a way that felt final and right. The boarding house required another expansion to accommodate both the growing family and the increasing number of guests. Cole spent the better part of 1894 building a proper wing onto the east side of the structure, creating a separate family living area that gave them privacy while keeping the guest rooms available for paying customers. The new addition included a larger kitchen, a proper dining room for family meals and bedrooms for each of the children, along with a spacious master bedroom for Cole and Nora that had windows overlooking the mountains they both loved. Republic itself was growing and changing around them. The mining operations that had been largely dormant were experiencing a small resurgence as new veins of ore were discovered in the surrounding mountains. The timber industry continued to provide steady work, and new businesses were opening along the main street. A proper hotel opened in 1895, which some people thought might hurt the boarding house's business, but Nora and Cole had established such a reputation for quality and fair dealing that their rooms remained consistently full. On a crisp October morning in 1896, Cole woke before dawn and lay in the darkness, listening to Nora's steady breathing beside him. They had been married for nearly 5 years, and the love he felt for her had only deepened with time. She was his partner in every sense of the word, strong and capable and endlessly giving. He thought about the man he had been when he first rode into Republic, running from trouble and carrying the weariness of years spent drifting, and he marveled at how completely his life had changed. He rose quietly and dressed, then made his way downstairs to start the fire in the kitchen stove. It was his habit now, this quiet time in the early morning before the household woke, and he used it to think and plan and simply appreciate the life he had been given. As the fire caught and began to warm the room, he heard small footsteps on the stairs and turned to see Daniel standing in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning, Papa," the boy said, his voice still thick with sleep. "Morning, son. You are up early." Daniel padded across the kitchen and climbed into one of the chairs at the table. "I wanted to help you today. You are fixing the fence in the back pasture, right?" Cole felt warmth spread through his chest. His son was always eager to help, to learn, to be involved in whatever his father was doing. "That is right. You can hand me tools if you want." Daniel's face lit up with a smile that reminded Cole so much of Nora that it made his heart ache in the best possible way. "I will get dressed and eat quickly," the boy promised, scrambling down from the chair and racing back upstairs. By the time Nora came down with Thomas balanced on her hip and Grace trailing behind, complaining about having to brush her hair, Cole had breakfast started, and Daniel was dressed in his work clothes, bouncing with impatience. Nora met Cole's eyes across the kitchen, and the look they shared was full of understanding and shared joy. "Your son is eager to work today," Nora said with amusement. "Takes after his mother," Cole replied, stealing a kiss as he passed her to flip the pancakes on the griddle. The day unfolded with the comfortable rhythm that had become their norm. Sarah and another woman named Margaret arrived to help with the boarding house duties, greeting the family warmly before setting to work. The guests came down for breakfast, filling the dining room with conversation and the clatter of silverware on plates. Nora managed it all with practiced ease, making sure everyone was served and happy while also keeping an eye on Grace and Thomas. Cole and Daniel headed out to work on the fence after breakfast, and true to his word, the boy handed his father tools and held boards steady while Cole hammered. They worked in companionable silence, punctuated by Daniel's questions about everything from how to tell if wood was good quality to why the mountains turned purple in the evening light. Cole answered each question patiently, remembering his own youth and how much he had valued the rare adults who took his questions seriously. "Papa," Daniel said after a long stretch of quiet work, "are you glad you came to Republic?" Cole set down his hammer and looked at his son, seeing the genuine curiosity in the boy's young face. "I am more than glad, Daniel. Coming here was the best thing I ever did. It gave me your mother and you and Grace and Thomas. It gave me a home." "Mama says you saved us," Daniel said. "That we would have lost the boarding house if you had not come." "Your mother and I saved each other," Cole said carefully. "She gave me a reason to stop running, and I was able to help her keep the house. But make no mistake, son, your mother is the strongest person I know. She would have found a way, with or without me." Daniel considered this, then nodded seriously. "I want to be strong like Mama and good with tools like you," he announced. Cole ruffled his son's hair affectionately. "You are already well on your way to both." That evening, after the guests had been fed and the children put to bed, Cole found Nora in their bedroom, brushing out her long, dark hair in front of the mirror. He came up behind her and took the brush from her hand, running it gently through her hair as she closed her eyes and leaned back against him. "Daniel asked me today if I was glad I came to Republic," Cole said quietly. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That it was the best decision I ever made." He set down the brush and wrapped his arms around her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Do you ever regret it, taking a chance on a stranger who showed up at your door, Nora turned in his embrace to face him directly. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything, Cole. A partner, a family, a life I never dared to dream I could have." "We gave each other everything," Cole corrected, echoing the words he had said so many years ago. He kissed her softly, then more deeply, and Nora melted into him the way she always did, as though they were two halves of the same whole finally reunited. The years continued to roll by, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Daniel grew tall and serious, with his father's steady hands and his mother's business sense. Grace remained spirited and clever, always the first to volunteer for any adventure and the last to admit defeat. Thomas proved to be the peacemaker of the family, gentle and thoughtful, with an artistic bent that showed itself in the drawings he made of the mountains and the horses and his family. In 1899, when Nora was 35 and Cole was 39, they celebrated their 8th wedding anniversary with a dinner in the now thriving town of Republic. The children stayed home with Sarah, who had become almost part of the family over the years, and Cole and Nora dressed in their finest clothes and went to the new restaurant that had opened on Main Street. It felt almost decadent, being served instead of serving, sitting across from each other at a table covered with white linen and eating food someone else had prepared. Cole reached across the table and took Nora's hand, running his thumb across her knuckles. "I was thinking," he said, "that we should take a trip. Just the two of us. Maybe to Seattle so you can finally see the ocean." Nora's breath caught. It was the dream she had mentioned so long ago in those early days when they were still learning each other. "Cole, we cannot just leave the business." "Sure we can. Sarah and Margaret can manage for a week or two. The children are old enough to help. And you deserve to see the ocean, Nora. You have worked so hard for so many years. Let me give you this." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes, but they were happy tears. "You really think we could?" "I know we could," Cole said with confidence. "We have built something solid here. It can run without us for a little while. Say yes." "Yes," Nora said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, let us go see the ocean." They made the trip that summer, taking the train from Spokane to Seattle and marveling at the cities and towns that passed by the windows. Seattle was overwhelming after years in small mountain towns, all noise and bustle and more people than Nora had ever seen in one place. But Cole held her hand and guided her through it all, and when they finally made it to the waterfront, and Nora saw the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretching to the horizon, she felt something inside her settle and expand at the same time. They spent a week in Seattle, exploring the city, walking along the waterfront, visiting shops and theaters and restaurants. But as wonderful as it was, both of them felt the pull of home, the need to return to their children and their business and the life they had built in the mountains. When they finally boarded the train back to Spokane, Nora leaned against Cole's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "That was amazing," she said. "Thank you for making it happen." "You are welcome," Cole said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "But I have to admit I am ready to be home." "Me too," Nora agreed. "Me too." The turn of the century came and went, bringing with it new technologies and changes that slowly made their way even to remote Republic. The boarding house got electricity in 1901, which meant they no longer had to rely on oil lamps and candles. Cole installed electric lights throughout the building, marveling at how bright everything looked. The children thought it was magical, and even the guests remarked on how modern and progressive the establishment had become. Daniel turned 18 in 1904 and announced that he wanted to study business in Spokane. It was a bittersweet moment for Nora and Cole, proud of their son's ambitions, but sad to see him leave. They helped him prepare, setting him up with a small apartment and covering his tuition, knowing that the investment in his education was an investment in his future. He promised to return for holidays and summers, and he kept that promise faithfully. Grace, at 15, was already showing signs of being a formidable businesswoman herself. She had a sharp mind for numbers, and a talent for dealing with people that served her well when helping at the boarding house. She talked about wanting to expand the business, maybe opening a second location, and Nora and Cole listened to her ideas with a mixture of amusement and genuine interest. Thomas, at 12, remained the artist of the family. His drawings had evolved into paintings, and he spent hours capturing the beauty of the mountains and the town on canvas. Cole built him a small studio in the barn, and Thomas would disappear into it for hours, emerging with paint-stained hands and a dreamy expression that made his parents smile. On a warm summer evening in 1905, Cole and Nora sat on the front porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set over the mountains as they had done countless times before. They were in their 40s now, with gray beginning to thread through their hair and laugh lines etched around their eyes. The boarding house behind them stood solid and prosperous, a testament to nearly 18 years of hard work and dedication. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I had ridden past that day?" Cole asked quietly. "If I had not stopped?" Nora was quiet for a moment, considering. "I try not to," she admitted. "It is too frightening to think about. I was so close to losing everything." "But you would not have," Cole said with certainty. "You would have found a way. You are too strong to have given up." "Maybe," Nora said, "but I am glad I did not have to find out." "I am glad you stopped. I am glad you stayed." "Me too," Cole said, pulling her close. "Every single day I am glad I stayed." They sat together as the stars began to appear overhead, comfortable in their silence and their love. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their remaining children and their guests, the boarding house alive with the sounds of people and life and home. The years of struggle were long behind them now, faded into memory like old photographs. What remained was the life they had built together, solid and real and full of love. A boarding house that had once been failing was now thriving. A woman who had been desperate and alone was now secure and surrounded by family. A man who had spent years drifting had found his home and his purpose. And it had all started with a chance meeting on a dusty August afternoon in 1887, when a broke woman running a failing boarding house looked up and saw a tired cowboy riding into her life, and neither of them knew that they were looking at their future. The story of how they saved each other, how they built something beautiful from desperation and hope, became part of the fabric of Republic's history. Old-timers would tell newcomers about Nora Thornton, who refused to give up on her father's dream, and Cole Irwin, who stopped at her boarding house and never left. It became a story about second chances, and the power of taking a risk on a stranger who might just turn out to be exactly what you need. And in the years that followed, as Daniel graduated and returned to Republic to help expand the family business, as Grace took over more of the management and proved herself brilliant at it, as Thomas's paintings began to sell and bring recognition to their small mountain town, Cole and Nora watched it all unfold with pride and satisfaction. They grew old together, still partners in every sense of the word, still in love after decades of marriage. The boarding house continued to prosper under their guidance and eventually under their children's management. And when they were very old, sitting on that same porch watching the same mountains that had witnessed their entire love story, they could look back on their life together with no regrets, only gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. The broke boarding house and the cowboy who became her first and only guest, until he became so much more. It was a love story born of necessity and desperation, nurtured by hard work and mutual respect, and ripened into something that would last not just a lifetime but generations. Their children would tell their children about how Nora and Cole met, how they saved each other, how they built an empire from almost nothing through determination and love. And decades later, long after Nora and Cole had both passed peacefully in their sleep within days of each other, the way longtime couples often do, the boarding house still stood in Republic, Washington, still welcoming guests, still offering clean rooms and good food and fair prices, still bearing the name Thornton and Irwin Boarding House in faded but proud letters across the front. It stood as a monument to what two people could build when they took a chance on each other, when they chose to see possibility instead of defeat, when they turned desperation into determination and fear into hope. And somewhere in the mountains beyond, in the places where legends live, the spirits of a woman who refused to quit and a cowboy who found his home smiled at each other and knew that their love story would continue to inspire as long as the mountain stood tall, and the boarding house welcomed travelers in from the dust and the heat and the long roads that sometimes lead exactly where you need to be, even when you do not know it yet.